Elias stood on the balcony of his 35th floor apartment, the city lights reflecting off the polished crystal of his expensive watch. At 35, he was the image of a modern conqueror. To the outside world, his life was a sequence of high-definition highlights. The sleek German car in the garage, the tailored suits that felt like armor, and his beautiful wife, Elena, moving gracefully through their minimalist kitchen. But beneath this silver screen perfection, the foundations were beginning to crumble, eaten away by silent termites he refused to acknowledge. He lived a masterpiece on the outside while the canvas within was rotting. He returned to his home office, a space filled with expensive tech and the heavy scent of mahogany. For hours, he had been polishing a marketing presentation. He adjusted a shadow on slide 12, then changed a font size by half a point over and over. He told himself this was the pursuit of excellence, the mark of a true professional. In reality, it was the perfectionism trap. By obsessing over the trivial, Elias was avoiding the terrifying possibility of being judged on the substance of his work. He was so afraid of a less than perfect result that he stayed trapped in the process. When the clock struck midnight, the deadline for the senior promotion had passed. The submission portal was closed. He had traded his future for a perfect shadow on a slide nobody would ever see. Dinner that night was a silent theater. Elena had prepared a meal that sat cooling between them. But Elias wasn't present. His thumb rhythmically swiped across his glowing smartphone screen, chasing the dopamine loop, every like on his recent post. A photo of his car parked in front of a high-end restaurant felt like a tiny hit of morphine for his ego. Elena was speaking, her voice a melody of concern about their lack of connection. But Elias was busy replying to a stranger who admired his lifestyle. He lived for the digital validation of people who didn't know him, while the person who knew him best was becoming a ghost at his own table. This was his secret fuel. He believed that by appearing successful, he would finally earn the respect his father had never given him. His father had been a man of iron and silence, and every curated photo was a silent message to a ghost who had never said, "I'm proud of you." The next morning at the agency, the air felt thick with the weight of missed opportunities. His boss approached him with a proposal, a risky, revolutionary project involving a new tech startup. It required a leap into the unknown, but it was the only way to stay relevant in a shifting market. Elias, paralyzed by the comfort zone prison, politely declined. He chose the safety of his current stagnant accounts, convinced that staying in his lane was the smartest way to survive. He didn't see his boss's eyes cool, unaware that the company was already mapping out layoffs for those who refused to innovate. When he returned home, the tension finally broke. Elena confronted him in the hallway, her eyes reflecting sadness and exhaustion. She asked where he had gone, why he was never really there even when they were physically in the same room. Elias dismissed her with a sharp wave of his hand, his voice rising in defensive irritation. He told her he was doing it all for their future, for the apartment, for the life they had built. The future he was building was a hollow shell. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. As he turned away, his phone buzzed, not with a like this time, but with a notification from his banking app. A red alert flashed across the screen. His primary account was overdrawn. The cost of maintaining his hollow image had finally surpassed his reality. Just as the weight of that realization hit his stomach, his phone rang again. It was his boss, calling for an urgent late-night meeting about his recent performance. Elias pushed through the heavy glass doors of the marketing agency, the silence of the late-hour office ringing in his ears. The sprawling open floor, usually a hive of creative energy and frantic typing, was now a graveyard of empty desks and flickering monitors. He made his way toward his boss's corner office, but a movement in his own cubicle caught his eye and made him freeze. There, sitting in the high-backed ergonomic chair Elias had insisted on as a symbol of his hard-earned status, was his junior assistant. The young man, whom Elias had mentored with a mix of condescension and sporadic guidance, was hunched over a glowing screen. He wasn't working on a minor task. He was navigating the master files of Elias's largest accounts with an air of practiced ownership. When their eyes met, there was no flinching or apology. The junior assistant simply nodded, a cold, professional acknowledgement that the torch had already been passed while Elias was busy polishing shadows. The subsequent meeting with his boss was a brief clinical affair that felt like an autopsy. The words "too slow to adapt" and "lack of visionary focus" cut deeper than any shout could have. Elias was being sidelined, his accounts officially handed over to the very person he had considered a mere shadow. He had been so busy perfecting the frame that he had let the portrait rot, and now the agency was moving on without him. Walking out into the humid night air, a bitter poison began to fester like an open wound. He was succumbing to a destructive victim mentality, a habit where he spiraled into a narrative that he was the protagonist of a grand tragedy. As he navigated the dark city streets in his expensive car, he didn't see his own procrastination or his refusal to innovate as the cause of his downfall. Instead, he felt like a martyr, betrayed by an ungrateful mentee and a soulless corporate world that lacked any sense of loyalty. He cursed the unfair system, wrapping himself in a thick cloak of resentment that shielded him from the uncomfortable truth of his own stagnation. He was becoming a prisoner of his own story, blaming every external force for a cage he had built with his own hands. To drown out the stinging noise of failure, Elias pulled into a brightly lit fast food drive-thru, the first of several comfort stops that night. He was neglecting his own temple, a habit of treating his body as a secondary thought, a mere vessel to carry his ego from one meeting to the next. He inhaled caffeine to stay awake and processed sugar to mask the crushing fatigue that had lived in his bones for months. As he sat in his car, the dashboard glowing with expensive electronics, he ignored the rhythmic, sharp throbbing behind his eyes and the persistent, dull ache in his chest. He prioritized his facade of strength over his biological reality, failing to see the irony of maintaining a luxury car while allowing his own engine to stall from neglect and chronic stress. The arrival at home offered no sanctuary. The luxury apartment, which usually felt like a trophy of his success, now felt like a silent courtroom. Elena was standing in the center of the living room, her face pale under the recessed lighting. Spread across the marble island were the paper ghosts of his deception, hidden credit card statements, final notices, and the overdraft alerts he had intercepted for months. The domestic climax was sudden and visceral. She didn't scream. She spoke with a quiet, trembling clarity that was far more terrifying. She confronted him with the numbers, the crushing debt used to fund the designer clothes, the dinners they couldn't afford, and the image of a life that was essentially a theatrical performance. The emotional distance that had been growing for years finally bridged into a visible, permanent break. Faced with the wreckage of his integrity, Elias reached for the habit of avoiding difficult conversations. Instead of falling to his knees and confessing the depth of his failure, he doubled down on the lie. He looked into Elena's tear-filled eyes and invented a non-existent performance bonus that would supposedly fix everything by next month. He chose the temporary safety of a lie over the healing, painful work of the truth. This final betrayal of trust was the last thread to snap. He saw through her eyes that she no longer recognized the man behind the mask. The next day, Elias returned from a walk to find the apartment echoing with a hollow, terrifying silence. Elena was gone. On the kitchen island lay her wedding ring and a note that read like an obituary for their relationship. She wrote that she still loved the man she had married, but she could no longer be a spectator to his self-destruction. He sat on the edge of the bed in the darkening room, the silence pressing against his eardrums. Suddenly, his heart began to race, not with the dull ache of before, but with an overwhelming wave of explosive terror. His breath came in shallow, jagged gasps as he realized he had lost his health, his wealth, and the only person who truly knew him. Sitting in the dark wreckage, Elias suffered a minor panic attack that felt like a heart attack, realizing he had destroyed his future for habits he once thought were normal. The silence in the luxury apartment was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that served as a mirror for the hollowness of Elias's existence. For a full week, he remained within those high-priced walls, the designer furniture feeling like cold museum exhibits of a life that had failed its final inspection. He spent hours staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, watching the mask of the successful executive crumble away to reveal the exhausted, frightened man beneath. He finally identified the seventh and most insidious habit that had acted as the foundation for all his other failures: a total lack of intentionality. He realized with a stinging clarity that he had been living on autopilot for over a decade, merely reacting to the lingering shadows of his father's disapproval, the relentless pressures of his industry, and the shallow digital demands of his social circle. He had not made a truly conscious choice in years. He had simply been a passenger in a high-speed vehicle fueled by vanity and steered by a desperate fear of being seen as ordinary. This realization was the turning point, the moment the passenger finally reached for the wheel to perform a radical audit of his soul. Elias began the grueling process of dismantling the cage he had so carefully constructed. He did not wait for a miracle or a corporate rescue that would never come. Instead, he took immediate, decisive action to align his reality with his new understanding. He listed the luxury car for sale, sale, ignored the blow to his ego, and contacted a realtor to move from the penthouse into a modest, sunlit one-bedroom rental on the quieter outskirts of the city. The transition was agonizing for his pride, but strangely liberating for his spirit, as each sold possession felt like a shackle falling away from his wrists. In an act of profound humility that would have been impossible for his former self, he called the junior assistant who had replaced him at the agency. There was no shouting or bitterness in his voice this time. Instead, Elias offered a genuine, heartfelt apology for his previous arrogance and spent hours explaining the intricate nuances of the client's histories, ensuring the young man succeeded where Elias had faltered. He replaced his toxic morning routine of scrolling through envy-inducing social feeds with a simple, vigorous walk in the morning air. Reconnecting with the physical world he had ignored for so long, he traded the pursuit of digital validation for the pursuit of internal clarity, spending his evenings reading books that challenged his perspective rather than seeking likes from strangers on a glowing screen. Months later, with a clearer mind and a healthier body, Elias sought out Elena. He did not arrive in a flashy car or attempt to buy her back with grand gestures or hollow promises of future riches. He met her at a quiet, weathered bench in the local park, dressed in simple, functional clothes that reflected his new life. He looked leaner, his eyes were bright, and he was more present than she had seen him since their early days together. He did not ask her to come back or beg for another chance at the life they had lost. Instead, he laid out his new reality with a raw vulnerability that left him completely exposed. He asked for her forgiveness, not for the lost money or the ruined reputation, but for the years he had spent being physically present while his heart was miles away, buried under digital noise and corporate ego. He showed her his plan for an honest, simpler life, one where he worked a mid-level marketing job for a local nonprofit, earning half of his former salary but finally owning every single second of his time. Elena watched him closely, seeing the man she had actually married, now stripped of the exhausting masks and the frantic need for external approval. A year passed, and the transformation was no longer a temporary fix but a permanent state of being. Elias was debt-free, healthy, and for the first time in his 35 years, truly alive in his own skin. He no longer viewed his life through the distorting lens of a smartphone camera or the judgmental eyes of his father. He was simply present. He worked his less prestigious job with a focus and quiet joy that his old self would have found completely baffling. The final scene of his redemption was not a promotion or a return to the high-rise, but a simple, unhurried walk through the park with Elena on a Tuesday afternoon. They talked about their daily lives, their genuine fears, and their quiet dreams. Their phones tucked away and entirely forgotten in their pockets. The future, he understood now, was not destroyed by a single catastrophic mistake, but by the slow, silent erosion caused by the small habits we refuse to change. As they walked into the soft, golden glow of the evening sun, a final reflection remained for those still trapped in the cycle. Which of these 7 habits is currently building your coffin? It is never too late to wake up, turn off the autopilot, and reclaim the life that was always meant to be yours.